Good afternoon. My name is Misty Livesey with the Stakeholder Affairs Group. I'm covering for Christina Osborne. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the latest Outage Management System Customer Partnership Group call. And at this time, I'd like to introduce my colleagues in the room with me here today, beginning to my left.
Sure. I'm Sandhya Balasubramanian from the IT Product Management Group.
Monica Monetary with Client Services.
Ramesh Desari from IT Product Management Group.
Rajan Stanwich from Operations Engineering.
Kalyani Abhyankar from Operations Engineering.
And as you know, the CPGs are open and interactive forum created in response to the customer's request to have more involvement in the planning, design, and usability validation phases of the ISO application development, in which participants and the ISO share ideas, opinions, and provide feedback. Meetings vary in frequency due to items discussed. As such, participation in these forums is critical and very much appreciated. As you can see from our agenda today, we will be discussing functional changes planned, improving web OMS usage and enforcing guidelines, and data retention in web OMS. Also, as you may know, our calls and webinars are recorded for stakeholder convenience, allowing those who are unable to attend to listen to the recordings after the meeting. The recordings will be publicly available on the ISO webpage for a limited time following the meeting. Of course, the recordings and any related transcripts should not be reprinted without the ISO permission. And lastly, if you have questions, please press #2 to enter the queue. And we ask that you please ask verbal questions only, and please state your name and the company you represent. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Sandhya.
Okay, thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. So to begin with, we were talking about the upcoming functional changes that we are planning for the WebOMS system. We covered some of this change in a recent technical forum as well. So this is about the discovery date changes, and I'm going to let Kalyani cover the business side of why we are making a change.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the reason for this change is we have this covered in ISO's tariff, but we didn't have it laid out properly in Outage Management BPM. So what we did was explain the tariff language in our Outage Management BPM, section 7.2.1. It basically just says what I believe everybody is, even today they are doing it or have been doing it so far, that if you are anticipating a forced outage, and so the KAISO Control Center must be notified as soon as feasible for a generating unit or a resource-specific unit if its current availability is going to reduce more than 10 megawatts, or if it's an eligible intermittent resource which has a Pmax of more than 10 megawatts, and its current reduction is going to, availability is going to reduce by more than 1 megawatt. But however, if all of us know that forced outages do happen, and if a prior notice is not possible to give it to KAISO at that instance, then for transmission facilities, they should be notifying the ISO through OMS within 30 minutes of the outage occurring, and for the generating resources eligible and resource specific, if with Pmax more than 10 megawatts, they should be notifying through OMS within 60 minutes of discovery with the discovery time of the issue. So I think everybody must be aware that there is a tab in OMS when you submit an outage of discovery time. That's where you have to enter the actual time of your discovery of the outage. And the OMS system will not default the discovery date. And if you need any more information, everything is laid out in section 7.2.1 in Outage BPM, which is also posted on the public website.
So can you say, please? One additional call out here is, from the UI perspective, the change we are making is we will not be defaulting the discovery date. So if you've not been putting that date in, all this time the system has been defaulting the date, the timestamp for you, which is the date when the outage, the date and time when the outage is created. We will no longer be doing that. So if you have not provided, if you don't provide that from the UI or the API, that date is going to remain null, and when you be a value in that discovery date. So that's the call out I want to make. Before we move to the next slide, are there any questions?
And Lauren, can you let us know if there's any questions in the queue?
I will, and we do not.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, this is a change that we are proposing. We've received several city tickets on this topic. So basically what's happening here is for the resource outage results, we are able to provide to you pending requests in the response. But for transmission outage results, currently we do not provide back that information about pending requests. So we had questions about why that's not happening. So we did find an issue in the system that we're trying to correct. But in order to completely address this issue, we will need to make an XST change. So the question to all our users is about how quickly are you able to then consume the new XST. The version of the XST will not change, but you will need to consume a new XST in order for us to provide back the pending request in the response of the retrieve transmission results. So again, if you have any concerns about timelines, by all means, please send us a city. At this time, we are thinking of making this change by the end of March. So if that is a timeline that your application cannot support, or you see a problem, or you need additional time, we would like to hear back from you about what's feasible in your systems. And Mo, is there any other way you think they should be providing us responses other than city?
I think city is appropriate. That way we can track, and then we can see where the status is at that time.
Okay. Are there any questions before we move on? Okay. Next slide. One more. So we've been having some performance issues, and I know customer service has been doing a lot of outreach to several of our clients about do's and don'ts. We are planning to address some of these performance issues that you've been seeing in the system, and it's more like a holistic approach that we want to take to address this issue. It's not just one or two participants and their behavior, but also how should the system behave as a whole in order to get better performance from the system for all participants. So we've been raising awareness about there being performance issues since last year. So that's what it says, raising awareness efforts started in 2019. We are going to be publishing detailed guidelines end of Q1, and some of the upcoming slides talk about that, about do's and don'ts, and how you can better use the system and get better usage out of the system. And our plan is to enforce certain some of these do's and don'ts by 10/1/2020. So this is the forum for you to let us know if there are certain changes that we cannot do, or you need more time. But as of now, we want to go ahead and enforce these guidelines in full. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first slide about do's and don'ts. When there's an outage event, I'd like for you to create an outage card for every event. An outage card is event-driven. It's not a placeholder for all outages to come. So you ideally should not be spanning that across months. And we've also seen outage cards being used for years. So that is not a valid way of using this outage card. It should only be for a specific event. Okay, the next one is about availability. The availability points are basically when the availability changes between two timestamps. So having too many availability points in an outage makes that outage card fairly unwieldy. So and also if there is no change in the availability, then you want to consolidate that and provide just the start and the end. What we've seen as a behavior is people submitting availability points on an hourly basis, even though the availability point does not change. So if you have 10 megawatts and say, hours 1, 2, and 3 all have the same 10 megawatts as the availability, we'd like you to submit that as a time span starting from hour 1 ending to hour 3, instead of giving us 3 different records for the same availability point. The next one's talking about span. We do want you to limit your outage up to a week. If it's hourly changes that you are seeing on your resource or your transmission card, and if it's month, for daily changes. When an outage is created with several breakpoints spanning several months, it makes that outage card really unwieldy. So there is a performance degradation when we have more and more of these cards. So that's what the third bullet talks about. Fourth one's about outage updates. This is, if you have changes in availability that's more than 1 megawatt, that's really when we want to see the outage cards being submitted. For changes that are lesser than that, ideally we would not expect you to be submitting that to the ISO. Again, limit changes submissions to once every 12 hours, especially if the outage start is more than 48 hours from the current time. If you're trying to ping the system too often for very minute changes, then again, there's a performance impact on the system. So before we move forward, are there any questions about these bullets? No? Okay, next slide, please. We're getting into APIs here. So in general, we want API requests to be spread over a few minutes between submits and retrieves. The submits and retrieves both extract information from the same availability table. So if you're trying to do it a few seconds apart or in very close proximity, then you will see a performance impact. You're not going to get your responses very quickly. So that's what we've been seeing. We did receive several city tickets asking about this issue, and some people got like a 502 error. So that's because we were seeing submits and retrieves happening in at the same time or like 2 seconds apart or something. So we want you to spread it over a couple of minutes so that you are able to get a valid response from the system. Also, there is a acceptable use policy. I believe we have a link to that, or we have a slide that talks about that, and we'll get more into details there. So I'm not covering the don'ts in all the slides. I just want to reiterate the do's. The don'ts are obviously the flip side of the do's. The next one's about retrieve. Retrieve, we do want you to retrieve using the update parameter. Both the availability service as well as the resource outage data as well and the transmission outage data service, all of them have the update parameter. We do want you to use that so that you're only pulling the changes and not pulling in like the actual outage cards over and over again. That is the best usage of the system. Also, in terms of the network traffic, if you use just the update parameter, you are only looking at the changes and pulling in less information. It's better performance for your system as well as the WebOMS system. We also recommend that you retrieve every day and within 24 hours and use that update parameter so your system is in sync with WebOMS if you are retrieving often. The retrieve resource and transmission outage, we would ideally like you to use the latest version, which is V3 of the service. We will be supporting V2, but V3 has the best performance from in terms of the API. It has all the latest the features, so we would like you to be on the latest version. And you can also check for warnings and errors to correct your outages. Under the outage validation section, you will get a response back, and we want you to actively monitor your outages and check your warnings and outages and errors and correct that as needed. For the retrieve availability, the latest version is V2, so that's the service we will recommend you use. Okay, before we move on, any questions?
And just a reminder, you can press #2 to enter the queue for questions.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, these are some of the performance improvements that are in the pipeline for this year. The WebOMS UI, we are rewriting the UI with improved browser compatibility. We have received some issues from your side, from the participant side, and ISO has also been seeing that, so our vendor is working on enhancing the browser compatibility and also using the latest browser so that we have lesser security issues. But we'll get some initial changes probably in spring, and we'll give you updates as to when we can roll those out in production and as a map stage and prior to production. We'll give you updates in upcoming CPG calls. Okay, the next one's about the broadcast outage updates. I did cover that in a prior slide. We want to, this one is about broadcasting updates out to you. So currently you come and retrieve updates from us, but we are planning to create some new services so that we broadcast changes to you, and that way you will need to pull less from us. It helps in terms of the overall performance of the system. So before we move on, are there any questions about this?
Lauren, do we have any questions in the queue?
We do have callers in queue. Okay. Caller, please go ahead. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is open. All right, we'll move to the next caller.
Hi, this is Arun Devarakonda from PCI. Can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm sorry, I had a little bit of trouble actually getting on the queue, so my questions start all the way back from a couple of slides back. So the discovery date, that's something that you folks are not enforcing as a required field in the web UI. I think that's a step in the right direction. That's fine. There were issues in the API centered around discovery date also. There were instances where the discovery date was coming back null, that element was entirely absent in the payloads. And that was something that was brought to your attention via a CD ticket. Would you folks happen to know if that's something you've addressed or have plans of addressing?
So we did address that. We currently, the retrieves will find that date being populated. So there was an issue where we were not defaulting that date. We've corrected that, and it was a very specific scenario where, submits were being provided to us, but, and we were trying to create multiple outages using a single submit. Then we were seeing that the discovery date was not being defaulted for all the outage cards that were being created. So we did correct that, but that was just to level set the current behavior. What this slide is saying is that we are going to remove the defaulting entirely. So if you do not submit it to us, then in your retrieve, you are going to see that date being null.
And that's fine. So being null is different from the element being missing entirely, right?
Well, the element will be missing, but it will not be populated at all. That date is going to be null, and it's not a required field in the XSD. So we do not have to provide that back in the response. Especially, we will not be providing that if you do not provide that.
Okay. And is this a change that's been pushed to map stage already?
No. We are just talking about it in the CPG now, but we are planning that to get this done by end of March. So we'll push it to map stage. We'll give you an opportunity to test it before we move to production.
Okay, great. So next question's around your XSD change proposal. So that's probably the next slide. So specifically for this, if you're not changing the XSD version and you're planning to make a change to the XSD, we would still need to recompile our clients, right? So there's some amount of coordination needed with you folks. We'll have to couple work together, so to speak, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why we want to bring it up and want to know if there's anything that you see that, if you've got some other big projects in the pipeline you cannot accommodate, we want to hear from you. We cannot make this change without, coordinating with you, exactly why we want to, bring this question up to the forum.
Gotcha. And the moment this is pushed to map stage, essentially map stage would be unusable for folks who have not moved to this new version of the XSD. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, that's good to keep in our minds while we sort of figure this timeline out.
Right. So, we've heard this is actually something that came up from a city ticket. So users have complained that they are not getting the pending requests. We want to address that, but we cannot address that without, everybody jumping on the same bandwagon, and we are marching to the same tune, to the same net goal at the same time, right? So, we can do this end of March. We'll be sending some external communication also just to give you a reminder. But if there's anyone that cannot make this timeline, we definitely want to hear from you so that we, take that into account when we look at an alternative date.
Okay. We'll work through our clients and get CV tickets created. Can we move on to the AUP, please?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Sorry, could we move on to the next slide, the acceptable use policy?
Sure.
So more specifically, I think it's.
Is this a slide, the right slide you want us to be at, or the next one?
This is fine. Actually, it specifically had a question around the time span, right? So you were requesting that you limit outage periods to a week for hourly changes and a month for daily changes. So our concern was that it's not uncommon for hydro units, and I'm sure clients can speak to this more, to have hourly changes that are out more than 48 hours, right? And the idea is to, whenever the change is made, to submit it as soon as possible to WebOMS as opposed to waiting to be within that 48-hour window of time. So I'm not sure if operationally this actually works for everyone. I'd like to sort of listen to other folks' feedback also, but it certainly seems like something that might impact business processes. So, we'll see if somebody else brings this up. Just a comment, I suppose, no question there. And could you go to the next slide, please?
No, before you move forward, I want to just address your concern. Arun, what we are saying is, we're not saying do not submit if it's within 48 hours. We're saying limit the number of times you submit the changes. So, if you're going to be changing every hour for something that's again, not an outage that's going to start anytime soon, then that's causing a performance impact. That's what this says. It doesn't say don't submit it to us. Just want to make sure that that's clear.
And
gotcha.
One more point of clarification. What we're also saying is that if you have an outage that has hourly availability points, that a profile that changes by the hour, then we're asking that you break that up into outages that span no more than a week or something to that extent. We don't want, what we're seeing is currently when you have an outage that has availability points that cycle through different hours, and if that outage spans multiple months, we're seeing a significant performance degradation because the system has so many points to compute. So we'd still like to see the information about the outage, but just probably broken into different outages. Does that help?
Yes, yep. I'm still trying to see if we get some feedback from other folks, but no, thanks for clarifying. That makes sense.
And in that scenario, if the availability points don't change, what we're saying is you can have an outage card that spans a month, but if you can consolidate and there's not too many availability points, then that's not an issue. So it's really how many availability points are you creating on that single outage card. That's really the question, because that's what is causing the performance issues.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, because many customers only have, in their system, they have hourly values. And that's why they can't transform them in the periods to us and then decompose back when they retrieve outages, right? That's why we are getting all these hourly values, which are causing issue with our performance.
Okay. Are there other questions in the queue?
Yeah, could you go to the next slide really quick, please? I think I've got one more question.
Sure.
Okay, so as far as utilizing V2 of the API for retrieve availability, we've actually been running into technical difficulties doing so, and we've sort of been forced to use V1. So we'll send you some more details, some payloads explaining what it is that we're running into, but as of now, we're unable to use V2 for retrieve availability. So that's just an FYI.
Okay.
Do you have any?
And, yes, we could forward the specific CD ticket details too.
Okay.
Yes,
so,
we've been getting our clients to create the CD tickets. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Because we do have several of our participants using the V2. We definitely want to hear from you and see what your issues are.
Got it. Okay. And as far as retrievals go, as long as we're using the update parameter, the guideline that you're providing is do not update more frequently than 5 minutes. Is that accurate?
The retrieve volume?
So every 5 minutes, you are saying like...
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Okay, that should be fine. And is there, and my last question on this slide is, as far as pulling warnings and errors, when you return these warnings and errors, are they being returned at the individual outage, or is it just a list of warnings and errors that you get back for the entire payload? And depending upon that, we need to figure out how to sort of process it and display it to the users.
Sure. It's at the outage level. It's per outage. If there's a warning or an error, then result is returned per outage.
Okay, that's all I have for now.
There's also some examples posted on developer.com for errors and warnings. So if you want to take a look at the sample out there, it will give you an idea of how to manage that, the warning and error section.
Okay, thanks for the feedback.
Sure.
Thank you.
Are there any other callers?
We do have more callers. Yes, so I'll go to the next call in queue.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Krishna Gari calling from Puget Solar Energy. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hey, so my question is, we started using version 3, and we are starting to see issues after switching to version 3, in particular with the API retrieve resource outage. So we created some city tickets, and it's been hanging around since like past 3 days. There's been back and forth, but the resolution provided was not to send market participant in the request. Is that true or accurate?
Hi Krishna, this is Ramesh. Actually, that was not the intention, so you can still provide. I don't know if you'll get a chance to look at my recent comment on the city ticket. I just did like before noon. So, but my intention was like, so whenever you're retrieving it, you're retrieving with a particular market organization ID in the APIs. But whereas when you're doing it for the participant filter in the outage summary, so you are looking at all the outages which the participant have access to. That was the reason you were able to see other outages than whatever you are requesting in the API. So I made a comment in the city ticket, so you can have an inline filter for particular market organization ID. So if you see any outages there, and if you are not returning those outages in the API, then that's the issue. But if it is working, like both API and the UI is the same fashion, so that means it's working as designed.
Yeah, we have automatic retrieve resource outages, and we are still having the problem. So I don't think the issue is resolved yet.
So I think the question was, there's a discrepancy. Sorry. So based on what we read, the question you had was, there's a discrepancy between the API versus UI behavior when you're trying to filter on the UI using the filters, and when you're trying to retrieve using the participant tag, correct?
So this is what troubles me every time I hop on a support or a city ticket. There's always a comparison between, hey, is this working in UI? And if it does, why not work in API? Maybe that's where from your perspective, your investigation is to. But from a user standpoint, we are giving you the request XML and saying that, hey, in response, we are not getting it. And again, we have drawn comparison between UI and API. I don't know, that doesn't make sense to us because we are giving you the request and...
Krishna, we hear you. Basically, the explanation was not that these should match and you should use UI versus API. The behavior is a little different. So we were telling you to use the inline filter to see the participant ID that you are trying to query for from the API. So the filtering clause that you're using was not right. But we can, again, get into specifics offline if you need.
So the reason we looked into the UI is like the participant ID, whatever you are using. We just want to make sure there are some outages in the system to see if they are not retrieving it. So when I filtered that one with the ID you provided, I don't see any outages in the system. So that was I made a comment.
Yeah, I replied back to you showing a screenshot that I could see them using that filter in the UI.
Yeah, so, but whatever the market organization ID you are using in the API, did you filter with that particular ID? In the inline, yes. Not in the participant, not in the participant, in the inline.
So the way PSC set up is, yeah, the way PSC set up is we have a different market participant for the BA side. So the records are created using a different market participant ID. But on the trade floor, when we try to download these outages, we use a different market participant, which has read-only access to read those outages.
So
and it was working with version 2. It didn't start. It only broke from version 3.
Yeah. How about this one? After this call, we will call you and we can discuss offline.
Yeah. It looks like it's a specific
to your case. So
question that you have. We can address that offline.
Are we ready for the next?
Yeah. Next caller, please.
Please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. Wasn't sure. This was regarding the XSD change for version 3. So we were this is Gene from SDG&E.
Perfect. Thank you.
And so we were making plans to actually migrate to version 3, I think sometime in mid-March. But sounds like this XSD change can, if we don't upgrade, it will break the API. Is that correct? If we don't, like at the end of March when XSD is updated, if we don't have the latest XSD, will our API still work or not?
No, your code is going to work, but your XSD needs to be recompiled with the new version. But again, like I said, we want to hear back from all participants and make sure that everybody can do it. Otherwise, we may end up pushing this out by a month or so.
So if we don't compile the XSD, what would happen on our side? Would there be errors on our side?
Yes, there will be errors.
Okay. Because I think we have some release management process, so it would have to be coordinated for a very specific date and time. Is there a way you can push out the XSD as another version so it doesn't break people who are using version 3?
So the current practice is if there is a change to a required field, that's really when the version gets bumped. This is an optional field. So, and it's really, the change here is, a one-to-many association really for that pending request to be populated. So the change is fairly minor. So even though it's minor, we know that it will cause an issue if you don't recompile the XSD. But, it is not a change that will require an entire version to be bumped up.
Okay. That still presents a problem. So if the XSD will be changed actually end of March, we might just bump our migration to happen right after end of March. And so we'd be very interested in knowing exactly when you are planning on making this XSD change.
Sure.
And then let us know.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
We'd also appreciate a city just so we can keep track that you have an issue and you have this challenge and you're applying some upgrades. That way, when we plan timelines, of course I've taken note here, but we have something in our ticketing system that says that you've already raised this as an alarm to us.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll create a city ticket then.
Thank you so much.
Any other callers or questions?
We have 2 more callers in the phone queue.
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sean Davis, and I'm speaking on behalf of Portland General Electric. I have a question back on slide number 9. And my question revolves around the span, the span topic in particular. These folks have multi-state units that have multiple units that can be outaged over a month, month and a half. They also have some hydro units. And so when we talk about hourly changes, as from a business perspective, one of the things that they do is these multi-state units also have ambience associated with them. So that limitation on the weekly hourly change is going to be significantly challenging. They typically take a 6-week, 8-week outage, and ambience across a 6 or 8 week outage would be across 6 different child units for that period of time. So I'm wondering about how that should be handled.
There's a subsequent slide that we talk about, the aggregate resources and how we want to handle that. But this is more like a general guideline where we don't want too many availability points across an outage. So I think we'll get more into detail to talk about, especially the ORA resources and aggregates, parent with too many children. We will cover that in a subsequent slide.
Okay. Okay. And the only other thing is, when we look at daily changes, months for daily changes, that could be impactful in particular for folks that are under license restrictions for their hydroelectric units. Those restrictions may be hourly or they may be down to daily depending on the units themselves and their FERC license restrictions. So that could create a significant problem for them. They could be chunked up into different pieces. The challenge is that most business processes follow the single outage and notification perspective, so it's just a lot more work on the opposite side to try and balance, multiple outages across a specific time period, where in the past, especially for EIM folks, we've only had to manage a single outage for that period of time. So it's just a little, it's worrisome because it sounds like the system is not able to handle it. Is that correct?
If the system's not able to handle when there's too many availability points. Again, if you're saying you have an outage card that spans 6 weeks or 8 weeks and you don't have too many availability points, you are able to consolidate and you have 5, 10, something reasonable as opposed to 100 availability points, then the system can handle it. So it's really the number of availability points that we're talking about here that's causing a problem.
Okay. Yeah, no, and I understand that, and typically for these outages, they typically have hourly availability points across the 6 to 8 weeks point. So,
but are they the same values or no?
Yeah, that's the key.
No, they're not the same values.
And do you know how much the fluctuation is? Is it like...
So every hour is different value.
But is it less than a megawatt?
No, it's not less than a megawatt. These changes can go anywhere from 10 megawatts all the way up to the max of the unit. So, which is multiple hundreds of megawatts. It's the way the unit is modeled in the CAISO specifically to ensure it's modeled correctly for reporting purposes. They're also GADS-related units, so they're large enough to have each unit have to report out on their availability.
Sure. And we are talking, I think we're getting more into the ORA resource setup. So let's move on to the next slide. I want to cover that in detail in a subsequent slide.
Okay.
Are there any other callers?
We have one more question.
Sure.
Hello, this is Pete Torres, SCE. So along the lines with the span and outage updates also, my question is how this would be aligned with RA requirements. It seems like it may put us at a disadvantage based on the timelines for when we are allowed to submit these.
Are you talking about the outage updates? Like when you can still submit an outage that is by all means, you should submit an outage that you already know of. I mean, a planned outage still needs to be submitted. All we're saying is when you know the outage is not going to start until, a long time out in the future, don't submit the updates more frequently than twice a day. Every 12 hours is really when we want updates on that outage. But you should still go ahead and submit outages that you know that's out there in the future.
Yeah, I understand. So typically, we will submit the outages on behalf of our resources, and typically we'll submit them once we receive them.
Sure. Okay, so I think if it's not very clear, we'll add some more clarification to the slide to say it doesn't prevent users, or we don't want to prevent users from giving us their outages that they know of, that are planned outages. It just talks about providing updates very often. We don't, and yeah, so that's really the concern.
Okay. Do you have any other questions?
We have no more callers in the queue at this time.
Okay. Okay. Yes, next slide. All right, so this is especially, Sean, this is this deck where, this is a slide where we talk about the resources with several child resources. And this is typically, primarily to answer the question that you had brought up about, many children and each of them having different availability points, and that's stuff that you need to report on. So that is causing a significant performance impact on the system. So we've got, two proposals that we are bringing to the table here. One is, we have the participant that you report the issue, the outage at the parent level, and then we can have like a drop-down filter where you select only the handful of the child resources that has a curtailment, and then you provide the outage availability points for just those children. That's one option. The second is we have separate outage cards that need to be created for the parent and the child resources that have the curtailment. That way, if you've got like a really big aggregate that has far too many, several children, and you have a curtailment on only 2 of those child resources, then we are asking that an outage card be created for the parent and then the 2 child resources. So these are the 2 proposals that we think can significantly reduce some of the performance issues we are seeing, because what's been happening in these cases is if you have a parent that has, say, 10 child resources, we are mimicking those availability points across each and every child resource. So that just brings up the availability points to like hundreds of records on a single outage card. And that definitely has a huge performance impact, especially if you're trying to submit changes to that outage card and also retrieving it often enough. So that just escalates the performance issues on the system. So I'll just pause here and see if there's any questions or if there's any preferences. Also, we'd like to hear from you via the city process. If you have if you have a very strong preference for one option or the other, then please go ahead and tell us now, and also you can submit via the city.
So the view in UI, will we be able to see all the children values regardless of they change or not?
So in the first one, no. In both, the answer is no. If you are going to see the parent and you're only selecting, say, the 2 child resources, then those are the only 2 you're seeing on the outage card, as opposed to the other 8 that are not going to be picked. You're not picking it, so there's no curtailment, there's nothing to report there. And in the second option, you're creating specific outage cards for the parent separately from the child, so you're only seeing that child resource on that outage card.
One moment.
Sorry about that. So you just wanted to reiterate for the second option, if you've got, many children or many child resources, I always get confused about child versus children here, but if you have many child resources and you have curtailment only on a handful, then you are not reporting the rest because there is nothing there to report. There is no curtailment to report on the other child resources. Let's pause for questions.
And just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can press #2.
We do have a caller in the queue.
Go ahead.
Hey, thanks for that explanation on the aggregate resources, and I think I understand what you're saying here. The question, I have two questions here. First question is, how will this be reflected in the API? Because that's the way that we engage submissions to CAISO OMS. And then my second question is, and you'll probably get to this, but how is this change impacting multi-state units or units that have multiple generating units that are wrapped up into a single parent that have multiple breakpoints across that parent?
Sure, and can we just ask who's calling?
Sure, this is Sean Davis speaking on behalf of Portland General Electric. She has laryngitis today.
Okay, so how does this impact API? So in the case of, the option 1, there will be a change to the API, which is why some people probably would not prefer that option, because now we're asking the child IDs to be called out separately from the parent. I think that's something that you are already doing to some extent in the API today. Okay, so there is a change to the API. And the second one will be its own separate card. So there's really no change to the API from what you see. There's an internal change in the validation because now we are kind of handling each child resource as its own resource and not requiring you to submit it as a contained parent-child relationship. So it's more of a validation change at our end, but for you there is no API change. For you there's no XSP change, I should say. The way you break up might also, I don't know how you, if there are changes in your system for how you submit it, you might have some code changes there, I don't know. But there is no XSP change.
Yeah, and particularly the units that I'm thinking about have multiple hydroelectric units that are all consolidated into one parent, and it's a non-participating unit. But we do report that unit out because the aggregate is quite large.
Sure. So in that case, it will be you'll be creating outage cards for the parent, and then you'll have a separate outage card for each of the child resources that have the curtailment. If there's no curtailment, you would not have an outage associated with that child in outage.
Okay. And then because we have outages out there for quite some time, if this change is made, how will legacy records be handled? Will they be converted somehow, or what does it look like? I'm just thinking about outage priority, right? Obviously.
Sure. I mean, in option 2, there's no change to XSD. Legacy, again, will be reported back the way it is. The same retrieve service, you will just get more records for the legacy outages because there's more availability points that are currently on those outage cards. And the change will be, implemented as a point in time, and then going forward, the outage cards will be leaner. Basically, you'll have fewer availability points on it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Do we have any other questions?
What about the multi-state units? Well, you said that would be different, but we didn't explain it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I think we need to discuss that and get back to you. But as of now, we're talking only aggregates. We're only talking the aggregates. We were not talking about MSG storage.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did I answer your question, Sean?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Lauren, do we have any other questions in the queue?
At this time, there are no other callers in the queue.
Okay.
All right, we get to the acceptable use policy, and some of these you are probably very familiar with because the API users are already dealing with a lot of this. We just wanted to put that all together in a slide and post it so that it's easy for you to access. And it's also fairly standard across most of the other ISO systems, so you may very well be familiar with this. So the enforcement of the AUP is applied per service per user certificate in production and mass stage. We also clearly don't want you to be doing non-production use in production for obvious reasons. It causes a lot of performance issues. Also, that's not the right way you want to use production. The expected size of the payload, again, varies from 1 KB to 1 MB. The expected frequency, the average and maximum is on demand when you have your submits and retrieves. It's 50 per day or at the most 1,000 per day. This is again per service per user. A service shall be invoked no more than once every 5 seconds, but of course the prior slide said don't do retrieves more often than 5 minutes, so that would be our preference, but we know that in terms of AUP, if you do more often than 5 seconds, you will not get a response, you will get an error. The longest unavailable time for a service, typically we try to maintain the SLA of no more than 30 minutes unless there's a planned web-OMS maintenance that we communicate to you in advance. And at any point in time, if there is still a need for you to make changes to your outages, we have outage coordinators, and we ask that you call ISO directly to make changes to your critical near-term outages during any outage window. The expected response time for a service is variable anywhere between 0.1 seconds to 30 seconds, and expected time to exchange between the ISO server and your server is again the same window of time. And the service timeout, this is the end-to-end request to response. The SLA currently is set to 5 minutes. Are there any questions on this slide before we move on? Okay. All right. So again, this is to reiterate. We have been raising awareness with our performance issues, and we've chatted quite a bit about that in our CPG today. This deck is going to be available to you in the KAISO website, so please do go refer to it. And we would love to hear from you via CIDI about any concerns you have on any topics that we discussed today, or any future suggestions that you would want us to cover in the CPG. We will be enforcing the guidelines that you saw in the AUP by 10/1/2020, and again, if there's any system changes, we will be discussing via CPG and then taking your inputs before we make any changes. Any concerns, questions, thoughts? Next slide, please. Okay, web-OMS data retention. The access to online outage data is for a 6-year period from the actual end date of the outage. In the past, we have not purged anything, so that's the reason why we want to bring this up. Again, given the performance issues and the volume of data that's been growing in the system, outages that are older than this period, 6 years from their term date, will be purged from the OMS system starting in October 2020. And this will be an ongoing process. We will be maintaining that 6-year limit, and if once the outage, the term date is past that 6-year window, they will be purged from the system. We'll pause here for questions. Any questions?
We have callers in the queue.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Arun Devarakonda again from PCI. Just a couple of quick questions. If you would go back to your slide with the one more up, please. Basically, the exchange window, right? So our only concern was, were these numbers recently adjusted, or is it just, par for course? Because 30 seconds seems like a very large amount of time to expect a response back. You could have channels time out in the meanwhile.
This is just the guidelines that we have across the board for all systems. This is our ISO's acceptable use policy. That's typically not what you would see in production. You very likely get a response much sooner than 30 seconds. But that is the current guideline.
Okay, that's fair. The other question I had is actually all the way back on slide 10, so I could just, ask you the question for what it's worth. Basically, there was a statement there that essentially indicated that you want to spread the API requests over a few minutes, right, between submits and retrieves. So the process that we utilize today, we essentially do a submission, and then we turn around and ask OMS to tell us, hey, what is the status you've assigned to it? What's the MR ID or, your outage ID and things like that? Is that process potentially going to be impacted if you start enforcing this as a AUP policy later this year?
So the question is, what is the time span between your submission and retrieval? And how far apart are they?
The retrieval is done immediately after the submission is completed.
Don't we have out the message going out with outage ID and everything?
Yeah. So I mean, Arun, this is Ramesh. So basically, what is the criteria to immediately retrieve back? Because when you submit your outage, you immediately get the outage ID with the response, right?
Yeah.
So is there any specific reason you retrieve?
Yes, we don't receive the outage status or some of the other supplemental fields like your priority date or like your post or plan flag. So there are a bunch of things that don't come back immediately as part of just the submission response. We need to pull the entire outage back.
I see.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we would say
you have to be a separate request.
Yeah, can you space the two so that there is some. Ideally, we don't want we don't want the two requests to clash. That's really the intention of that because we have seen that
sure.
So submit complete, there's a retrieve that stops. But
for what it's worth, your broadcast. For what it's worth, your broadcast notification enhancement you were proposing might be the ultimate solution to this, right? At that point, you control when the broadcasts are sent, and we simply receive and process it. So let's not, I mean, if that's fleshed out, I would prefer that to be really the ultimate solution for what it's worth.
That is where we want to head. We definitely want to do that this year. But in the meantime, especially if you've been having issues with not being able to submit or having clashes because some of our participants did get some API errors, and that's primarily because the two requests have been clashing. So if that is not your use case, then I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Okay. The last question I had is sort of more broad, and I don't want to take up everybody's time. We've got a list of CD tickets that we were hoping we'd be able to get some expedited responses on, or at least some feedback on sort of where we are at. Instead of following up on the tickets, would it be conducive if we just compile this and sent the list to somebody on this call so you could at least take a look and see if there's something that can be done? Because oftentimes we find ourselves in situations where the issue we identify is really because of an issue with the API with WebOMS or with KISO. But since the impact of the issue is significant enough in our software and for our clients that we find ourselves scrambling to hot patch it ourselves and put stop gaps in place. And we really want to avoid that if possible. We'd really want these items fixed the way they're supposed to be fixed by making an adjustment at KISO instead. So we've got a list of items that fall into that category, and we're happy to share those with you.
So this is Monica with Client Services. So you can work directly with me. I will go through and pull all your tickets to see which ones that you have some concerns on. You mentioned earlier that you're working through your customers to submit the city case. Can you tell me which, or at least send us your customer information, or at least provide us with some information so I'll know which tickets you're referring to?
Yep, I'll be happy to send that info over to you. Sure. And was this Radha?
This is Monica.
Monica. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Arun, you said you had a list. We would like to see that list, please.
Definitely.
Okay.
Is there somebody specific you'd like me to send this to? If you could give me an email address, I can ship this off.
Sure. I can give you my email address, or if you
could give it City. You want a City? The list?
Go ahead and submit that list through. Have your customers submit that list through City, and if you submit it today, I will pull that.
Keep in mind these issues are across several clients, so it's probably not conducive to have one client submit them. Yeah.
If you can submit it, then
have one of your customers submit, or whomever you're working with. At least I can get your contact information by way of that, and then I can reach out to you and get the rest. But at least submit one and just indicate that this was based on the call from today, and I'll pull that and I'll get the rest of the information from you.
But if you already know the city numbers, then it's easier, right? You just list them all, and then we can find them by the numbers. We don't necessarily need to know who submitted.
Correct.
Okay, I can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
We have one more caller in the queue.
Thank you.
Hi there. I just was curious, again, this is Sean Davis speaking for my friends at Portland General Electric. I was just curious if you have another set, if you've already set the next CPG meeting date and time.
I do not believe we have one out yet.
Okay, no problem. Just worry.
No worries.
Okay. Any other questions?
At this time, we have no further questions on the phone.
Okay.
Can we go to the last slide? I just want to make sure we have no one. I think we're pretty much done. Yep. So if you have any questions or comments or any other items you want discussed, please go ahead and submit it today, and we'll pick it up for our next CPG call.
Thank you so much for joining and participating in today's call. Please keep in mind that there will be a recording of today's call in 1 to 2 business days that will be posted. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.